Final item of business today is the members' business debate on motion number 8449 in the name of Kenneth Gibson on Clyde 2020. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would be grateful if those members who wish to speak in the debate could press the request to speak buttons as soon as possible. Calling Kenneth Gibson to open the debate. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would first like to thank those 43 MSPs representing the independents and all 5 political parties in the Parliament who signed the motion to make this debate possible. Also, the Community of Arran Seabed Trust and Sustainable Inshore Fisheries Trust for their briefings, and in particular James Mackenzie for his energy, drive and enthusiasm. It is also good to see people in the gallery who have travelled a considerable distance for this debate, including a number of my own Arran constituents with whom I travelled on the boat from Brodick this morning. The Firth of Clyde is vital to Scotland's economic, cultural and environmental good health. It is one of the deepest coastal waterways in the British Isles, supports fishing, shipping and tourism, and 20% of all Scottish cargo passes through Clyde ports, whilst about 60% of all ferry traffic in Scotland travels across the Clyde. The Clyde also hosts Scotland's only naval base, and recreational boating is becoming increasingly important, not least in my own constituency, and about 40% of all Scottish boats berth in the Clyde. In recent decades, the Clyde has suffered severe losses in ecological and economic well-being. Overfishing has led to declining fish biodiversity, causing many marine species to become increasingly rare and indeed smaller over the years. The fishing industry has been forced to turn from its traditional finfish landings to an industry based increasingly on nephrops and scallops. The fishery has also led to a decrease in recreational angling boats that were once so popular. The trawlers undoubtedly disrupt a natural ecosystem, and trawls and dredges are invasive, dragging the seabed bottom. Such fishing methods enabled the expansion of fishing opportunities and for decades increased fish landings each year. However, in 1889, only 9 years after trawls were introduced into the Clyde, a 3-mile ban was placed on trawls because there was a noticeable decline in fish catches. This ban helped protect marine ecosystems, and although it had many beneficial effects, it was lifted in 1984, allowing for expanded fishing opportunities at high environmental and economic cost. The Clyde was once very productive with a wide variety of finfish and marine life, including schools of herring, cod, whiting, etc. But the introduction of more invasive fishing methods has intensified fishing past sustainable levels. Removal of the 3-mile ban was surely a contributory factor in the near collapse of bottom fisheries. The range of marine Clyde fish species has changed drastically, as many are unable to cope with trawling and indeed pollution. Fishermen have had to put more hours in to catch the same amount of fish they caught in previous years. In 1985, about 75% of all Firth of Clyde landings consisted of finfish, which now consists of only 2% of landings. As fish availability has declined drastically, the fishing industry has developed an overdependence on shellfish. Over time, sea angling has also faltered. Recreational sea angling was once a flourishing and profitable business, attracting people from far and wide to the waters of the Clyde. All the trophy-sized fish have disappeared, so many leisure fishermen stay away, and many areas of the Clyde have lost the tourism that sea angling brought in, damaging local economies. Clyde 2020 is a Scottish Government initiative to meet the European Union's environmental requirements outlined in the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, which promotes environmental practices to allow EU waterways to maximise their economic potential while supporting and maintaining healthy marine environments. On April 23rd, a Clyde 2020 summit is being held in Glasgow to discuss what measures should be taken to bring the Firth of Clyde up to good environmental standing by 2020. This event is intended to bring together representatives from the fishing industry, environmental groups, tourism industry and leisure organisations to explore different options, including improved fisheries management to re-establish a healthy marine ecosystem in the Clyde. It is important that the Summit and the Clyde Marine Regional Planning Partnership gives equal standing to all stakeholders and is not seen to favour a handful of bottom trawlers and scallop dredgers to the detriment of the Clyde environment and wider economy. Environmental initiatives created during the Clyde 2020 Summit should allow Scotland to become a leader in ecosystem restoration. The Scottish Government is already committed to a research programme that supports restoration of marine biodiversity in the Clyde. Many proposals have been brought to the table, and the Summit will look at possible environmental and economic benefits that provisions such as mobile and static gear zones, small protection zones and no-take zones will provide. The economic and environmental benefits of Lamlash Bay no-take zone has been evident since its establishment in 2008, following more than a decade of campaigning by Coast. The first of its kind in the Clyde in Scotland, the no-take zone is only 2 square kilometres a tiny fragment of the 3,700 square kilometre Clyde estuary. 5 years after its creation, scientific surveys showed that scallops are 50% more abundant than before the NTZ was introduced, queenies are 45% more abundant, and the larger sizes of both means their reproductive capacities have increased more than 100-fold. The NTZ is a success story, so there is some frustration that Marine Scotland and the Scottish Government are apparently so shy about singing its praises. The spillover effect alone can only have positive benefits for our fisheries. We need to recognise this success and apply similar zones elsewhere in the Clyde and beyond, given the opportunities presented to establish marine protected areas, not least the proposed South RNMPA. One of the biggest supporters of Clyde 2020 is the Sustainable Inshore Fisheries Trust, which promotes a sustainable management approach to all Scotland's waterways. SIFT is committed to projects that will rebuild marine biodiversity in the Clyde and promote sustainable fishing practices. They believe that combining these two objectives can create a sustainable and economically workable mixed fishery to benefit Clyde communities and indeed all Scotland. They are currently consulting on how organisations can work together to bring the Clyde to good environmental standing by 2020, attempting to submit a regulating order under the authority of the 1967 Shellfish Act to place sustainable management of the Clyde in the hands of local stakeholders. This already operates successfully in Shetland's waters, and we put in place a licensing management, an independent management organisation and more marine protected areas to assist in restoration. Presiding Officer, sadly, the Clyde is no longer a first choice fishery. Clyde 2020 is about bringing diverse groups together to create a mutually beneficial management system. Short-term environmental and economic restoration, however, is an integral part of the Clyde initiative. We also need to focus on the bigger picture, a long-term solution that will deal with issues such as pollution, littering, and ensure that the Firth of Clyde, through improved sustainability, will have an ecosystem biodiversity and bring economic prosperity for many generations to come. Thank you.
Many thanks. I now call Claudia Beamish to be followed by Stuart McMillan. Speeches of 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I thank Kenny Gibson for securing this important debate. And I apologise for having to leave, but I have a committee commitment after speaking. I'm glad to be able to speak today about the marine environment in the Clyde, especially the goal of achieving the good environmental status by 2020. And I want to say something about context. As members will be aware, we are required under the EU Marine Directive to achieve good environmental status by 2020. So to play our part in protecting our shared European marine resources is very significant, and the contribution that can be made by the inshore waters in the Clyde for the future is very significant. The passing of the Marine Act Scotland in 2010, of course, allowed us to transpose the EU directive into domestic law, and by all accounts it is a sound piece of legislation, which I hope the Cabinet Secretary will agree with me on. However, as I'm sure members will appreciate, there's a crucial difference between setting legislation and actually being able to implement the terms and the goals within them, which are often very complex and sometimes conflicting. And the statutory duty to protect fragile ecosystems, increase marine biodiversity and balance the potentially damaging impact of marine-based industries is a very complex one. And progress has sometimes been slow, which is why, again, I welcome the debate by Mr Gibson today in this context. It is my strong belief that sustainable development must be at the heart of all these issues. The Marine Plan is desperately needed, as it is intended to provide policymakers with the guidance they need to develop a marine strategy and balance the often competing interests that I've already highlighted. And I hope that the reason for the latest delay is that the Scottish Government is taking on board the scientific advice put forward by a range of NGOs such as RSPB, the Marine Conservation Society and also Scottish Wildlife Trust. I hope that when it is finally published, we will be able to have a credible plan which will support the Clyde and other inshore fishery areas, and not just for fisheries, but for the whole range of issues underpinned by biodiversity. On the issue of the Clyde itself, there is no doubt that this section of our coastline is very important for the overall health of our waters. Raising educational awareness on these issues is also vital, And today I want to highlight the Clyde in the Classroom project, which is a terrific project run by the Crown Estates. I was lucky enough to take part in, along with primary school pupils in rural Clydesdale. Aimed at P5 to 7s, pupils raise brown trout eggs in their class before releasing them into the Clyde and tributaries, in our case quite a small ditch, and seeing firsthand the development of a fish species which is native to Scotland. And this was a very exciting project which I commend. Last week I met with members of SIFT and the Sustainable Inshores Fishery Trust, who I understand are in the gallery today to listen to this debate, and I was encouraged to hear their commitment to ensuring the continued viability and enhancement of the Clyde waters. And I'm sure we are all hopeful that their pilot project in the Clyde is a success, and they will be able to cast their net wider and work in other areas of Scottish inshore waters. Their task is not an easy one. There is, as Mr Gibson has highlighted, a long-standing range of conflicts between the various fishing sectors. There's also shipping to take into account, and now marine tourism, which I fully support. But I'm hopeful the Scottish Government will provide them with the tools and support they need to tackle the problems faced in the Clyde. The introduction of a regulating order may well be the way forward, and establishing a Clyde Fisheries Management Organisation bringing stakeholders together is something I would want to support, and could help the Clyde achieve the much sought after good environmental status by 2020 and contribute to the overall health of Scottish inshore waters. So again, I thank Mr Gibson and wish the whole project well. Thank you.
Many thanks. And I now call Stuart McMillan, to be followed by Jamie McGregor.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. First of all, I want to congratulate my colleague Kenneth Gibson for securing this important debate. We've heard from Kenneth Gibson of the powerful reasons why we ought to do whatever we can to protect our inshore fisheries areas. But certainly I aim to focus my remarks on the economic reasons. I represent the West of Scotland region, so this issue obviously falls within my area, but also I chair the cross-party group on recreational boating and marine tourism. And one of the members of our cross-party group is the Scottish Sea Angling Conservation Network. I don't sail and I don't fish, but one of the things that really struck me with the work from the cross-party group is the increasing appreciation from the various groups involved that if there was a more collaborative approach across the wider marine tourism sector, then actually we could all benefit from that. And this was highlighted even more so when the cross-party group held our Marine Tourism Symposium in the Parliament actually 12 months ago this week, during the Scottish Tourism Week. We had various speakers, including from the wildlife tourism sector, and this really struck a chord with those who were in attendance. This actually helped provide the more holistic approach to the issue of marine tourism that possibly wasn't immediately visible to the operators, particularly in recent years as the economic conditions were challenging. However, the message from the wildlife tourism economy was clear that we can all benefit from a healthy wildlife in Scotland. Whether it's from a conservation position or an economic position, then Scotland can benefit when we consider the huge contribution that our environment actually makes to our nation. Now, in the motion it states that regarding a wide range of parties with an interest in the future of the Clyde, and I certainly can't disagree with that. As politicians covering the Clyde, we've got that interest, and certainly I've had discussions with Kenneth Gibson about the Clyde in the past, and sure maybe we'll have more going forward. However, the politicians are only part of the answer, and I would argue that the users of the Clyde are the people with the long-lasting solutions to the issues affecting the Clyde. The briefing supplied today from the Scottish Environment Link was helpful, and they highlight the issue of the Shetland Shellfish Management Organisation, but also that they welcome the further detail about emerging management proposals and the potential to meet the distinct and complex needs of the Clyde fishery. And, Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government Clyde Ecosystem Review said that the Clyde was best described as used agricultural land in need of restoration. Now, that clearly isn't good enough, and I think we will all be on the same page on that. But I do welcome the work that certainly has been underway to provide a more sustainable solution. The briefing that we received from SIFT, the Sustainable Inshore Fisheries Trust, was also helpful, and they highlight the issues that the Clyde suffers from an over-dependence upon shellfish, but 99% of the Clyde's landings, as well as the damage to the seabed habitats and the poor sea angling opportunities. and also with the 2020 targets to bring the Clyde back to the good environmental status is welcome, and I am convinced that we will actually have a solution for everyone. Presiding Officer, in July 2009, the Scottish Government published a report called The Economic Impact of Recreational Sea Angling in Scotland, and it indicated that the total expenditure in sea angling across the whole of Scotland was worth just over £140 million to our economy. This is despite what we know and have heard about the Clyde today. A healthier Clyde and a sustainable solution will, I believe, bring even more recreational sea anglers back to the Clyde shores and towns and villages, and I'm sure that the £140 million economic benefit will therefore increase as a consequence. But once again, I certainly would like to thank Kenneth Gibson for bringing this motion to the Chamber today. Thank you.
Many thanks. And I now call Jamie McGrigor to be followed by Alison Johnston.
Presiding Officer, I declare an interest as an Honorary Vice President of the Clyde Fishermen's Association. I too congratulate Kenneth Gibson on securing today's very important debate, and I'm pleased to take part in it. I welcome to the Parliament a number of my constituents in the gallery, including Mr and Mrs Tim James from Skipness, who are fishermen and fish smokers and own the famous Creeler's restaurant in Arran and the seafood cabin at Skipness. And I acknowledge the work undertaken by the Sustainable Inshore Fisheries Trust, which hosted a useful briefing on this subject in Parliament in January this year, and their desire to see a regulating order manage the Clyde. All of us in this chamber will agree that we want to see the Clyde enjoying as good an environmental status as possible. This must be in everybody's interest. The challenge we face is how to achieve this status while allowing existing fishing activities to continue in a sustainable and appropriate manner. And the Marine Strategy Framework Directive allows flexibility in its implementation to balance the interests of both nature conservation and sustainable marine harvesting, and this will be crucial. I'm very aware of the importance economically to communities in Argyll of the prawn vessels which currently fish the Clyde waters. These prawn boats have demonstrated that their impact on cod stocks is negligible. Creel fishing is also important, and artisanal local creel fishermen must be allowed to continue their business, and herein lies a problem. About 10 years ago, in order to keep twin-rig trolls, trawl fishermen agreed for conservation purposes to a weekend ban on trawling in the Clyde, whereupon an abundance of creel fishermen from everywhere pounced and probably caught just as many prawns as the trawlers would have caught, especially the female breeding prawns. And where does that leave the artisanal local creel fisherman who plies his trade with a small boat for lobsters, crabs and prawns? Surely there must be local fish for local fishermen of this type, rather than a free-for-all with big boats coming from Cornwall and elsewhere. We all spend time in this Parliament calling for more jobs in rural areas, so local fish will produce those jobs. Last year, Tarbert-based fisherman Kenny McNabb, past chairman of the Clyde Fishermen, came to Parliament and gave a fascinating and enlightening presentation on some of the reasons for the decline in various demersal fish stocks in the Clyde since the 1950s, which has led to the current dependence on the prawn fishery. Particular concerns were voiced about the accuracy and validity of some of the scientific data used to justify existing policies and restrictions in the Clyde area, and how such data is collected. I said then, and I repeat today, that I consider it is vital that the Scottish Government, Marine Scotland and all their scientists at all levels work closely with the local fishermen, as well as the other stakeholders, so that their practical knowledge can combine with scientific evidence to make that evidence as reliable as possible in the interest of achieving sustainable fisheries and fishing communities in the Clyde. The motion also mentions recreational sea fishing, and the Scottish Conservatives are positive about sea angling and the economic benefits it can bring. Indeed, I've previously done work with Scottish Sea Angling Conservation Network, and I commend their efforts. Other parts of my region, like Orkney, offer world-class sea angling opportunities, and it would be fantastic to see that replicated in the Clyde once again, as well as a return of some of the demersal fish stocks I referred to a few moments ago. To conclude, Presiding Officer, I welcome this focus on the Clyde, and I look forward to matters being progressed, but we must seek to take all interests with us, including those fishermen who currently make their living from the Clyde as we seek to improve the Clyde's biodiversity. And I think there are positive lessons to be learned from the Shellfish Regulating Order in Shetland, and I hope that these can be studied with a view to possible use on the Clyde. And I'd just like to say that in the 60s I used to go from Tarbert and fish myself as a sea angler with my mother, and we used to quite happily catch a box of haddock, codling and whiting, and take it back and feed it to the whole of the village. And I hope that can happen again one day.
Thank you very much. And I now call on Alison Johnston.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too would like to thank those who have travelled from far afield, those from SIFT, from Coast, and I'd also like to make you aware that I've had a very pleasant fortnight in the Creelers Cottage on Arran. The speeches at the Sustainable Inshore Fisheries Trust's parliamentary reception last month struck a real chord with me. Mr Nick Ferguson, the chairman of SIFT's advisory group, described the collapse of Firth of Clyde fisheries from sustained over-exploitation. He described the collapse of angling and tourism, the huge decline in the number of boats heading out from his home village. He told us that 28 used to go out every day, and today there are only 2 or 3. He spoke about the depopulation of the towns and villages around the Firth of Clyde, and a population decrease in the tens of thousands. And he described how most evenings there'd be 10 boats or so out fishing for recreation in the Kyles, and now he might see 1 if he's lucky. And he spoke about how this was home to the biggest sea angling competition in Europe, a competition that hasn't happened these past 25 years or so. The Clyde is now described as a fishery of last resort. The situation is bad, but SIFT and others believe it's redeemable. In countries which have taken decisive action, stocks have recovered, and we can take such action to return the Clyde to a vibrant living ecosystem that reverses the trends Mr Ferguson and others have so eloquently described. From the 60s, boats with diesel engines, sonar fish finders and heavy trawl mesh have transformed fishing from a seasonal and modestly profitable living to a year-round and lucrative one. But the herring became scarce, and then even bigger engines and new dredgers turned their attention to other species, including cod, plaice and sole. Little thought was given to the long-term impacts of these practices. And bit by bit, politicians removed what protection there was, opening up previously protected parts of the Clyde when the unprotected parts were fished out. And in 1984, as Kenny Gibson noted, a ban on trawling within 3 nautical miles of the shore was lifted. Presiding Officer, it really does beggar belief. But the marine protected areas in the 2020 plan give us an opportunity to do things differently. And I'm delighted to be taking part in a debate that's driven by the work of concerned local people, local businessmen, people who live in these areas, who understand them, and they also understand the potential of the jobs that can be created in recreational angling and in tourism. And I really would like to see Visit Scotland getting involved in this agenda to transform the Firth of Clyde and the areas around it. And what also struck me about the SIFT plan, the recovery plan, is that it's classic, practical green thinking about local control of resources and a clear understanding that sustaining a healthy environment is the foundation needed for a healthy economy, for jobs, for people's well-being and the well-being of the seas that sustain them. It's about an independent body led by local people, including traditional fishermen, being responsible for the area's best management, informed by independent science. It's about recognising the role marine protected areas can play in the Clyde, supporting conservation, and also seeing the need for measures that can put the economics of the fisheries first, measures like the regulation order being proposed. So we should all be very grateful to Kenny Gibson for bringing this debate, and it's so pleasing to see all party support on what really shouldn't be a partisan issue, nor one where people mistakenly believe that the interests of the environment and of the fishing industry should be at odds. I'd be grateful if the Cabinet Secretary will advise when the 3 proposed marine protected areas in the Clyde will receive this designation, and if he's determined that this summit will provide the results the Clyde desperately needs. I look forward to hearing the Minister's response, and I would urge him to work with SIFT, with Arran's Coast, with the Creelers and with the Clyde Fishermen's Association, and involve all such groups with equal footing to other stakeholders. Presiding Officer, it will be tight to make progress by 2020, but we need to do so, and through working together, a good start can definitely be made. Thank you.
Many thanks. And I now invite Richard Lockhead to respond to the debate. Cabinet Secretary, in around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you. Can I begin by welcoming Kenneth Gibson's motion and, of course, the opportunity to discuss Clyde 2020, which is a new programme to test and implement practical measures to restore the Clyde marine ecosystem. And I not only want to pay tribute to Kenneth Gibson and others in this chamber who, over the years in this chamber, have promoted the Clyde at every opportunity, but also, of course, many of the people in the gallery and others from local communities who have done so much through tenacity and determination to ensure that the future of the Clyde stays firmly on Scotland's agenda and this Parliament's agenda, and indeed my agenda as well. There is indeed lots of interest in Scotland's marine environment. We do have a rich marine biodiversity, and we are developing a new framework to manage our seas in Scotland. And of course the Clyde is no exception, with interest in the past from programmes like Panorama and The Economist magazine and many other publications, because over the last few years I think we have all noticed that the future of the Clyde has risen up the agenda, and that is one of the reasons why we are here today discussing this. And again, it is very much down in no small way to the efforts of those people from local communities who have championed the cause of the Clyde. But Clyde 2020 does provide a new opportunity to create a better vision for the Clyde. And of course, I recently had the pleasure of speaking at an event here in Parliament, organised by Kenneth Gibson and the Sustainable Inshore Fisheries Trust, and it was attended by a number of colleagues from across all parties in this chamber. At that event, I announced a stakeholder summit on Clyde 2020 to develop a vision for the Clyde and some key steps to achieve that vision that I will talk about shortly. The Firth of Clyde is a huge social, as we have heard, economic, as we have heard, and environmental, as many people have referred to as well, resource for Scotland. But all agree that marine environment is a resource which must be protected, and believe me, I am very committed to working with stakeholders to improve the Clyde ecosystem through the Clyde 2020 initiative. And that will involve bringing together marine planning, environmental and fisheries interests and underpinning action in these areas with new scientific studies. In terms of recent scientific studies, including a report by Marine Scotland Science, we have increased our knowledge of the Clyde ecosystem and how it has changed over time. We made the Marine Scotland Science study available to stakeholders and it was published back in 2012. And since then, our scientists are continuing to work in collaboration with others to ensure that we have the best available knowledge. Now, that work, combined with management tools such as the Marine Scotland Act that many members have referred to, our first marine plan, which again has been referred to, and proposals on marine protected areas, which Alison Johnson just referred to, will provide a new framework for managing and improving the marine environment on the Clyde. And voluntary measures, including the planning pilot in the Clyde, led by the Firth of Clyde Forum, and statutory regional plans, also provide an opportunity to complement and implement the EU Marine Strategy Framework Directive to achieve good environmental status at the North East Atlantic scale. And Clyde 2020, regional marine planning and the Framework Directive will assist in achieving a healthy Clyde ecosystem by that date of 2020. I am confident that that will happen if we all work together and address many of the issues that members have referred to. And community organisations and individuals continue to provide views and support new initiatives in the Clyde, such as these protected areas and the proposed improvements that are being discussed on fisheries management. For example, the community of Arran Seabed Trust developed protected area proposals for Lamlash Bay and more recently for the sea around South Arran. And I can assure Kenneth Gibson in response to his comment that the Scottish Government very much recognises the good story that can be told in the Lamlash Bay area, and of course hopefully will be told in the future for the wider sea around South Arran. So we recognise there is a good story to tell, and we have to build on that good story. The sea around Arran is productive and it's rich in biodiversity, and it supports communities both on and off the island. And visitors from home and abroad come to the island to enjoy the rich wildlife, while fishermen continue to work these areas and support their families. And as we have been hearing, there are restaurants there who are serving fantastic local seafood as well. I feel as if I am talking myself into a family holiday in Arran in the near future, given some of these attributes the island has. I have been there in business a few times over the last few years, but I really should go for a holiday and enjoy that seafood and the rich wildlife. So, the MPA proposals in particular will help maintain a healthy sea for the future so that we can continue to enjoy the benefits. And stakeholder engagement has to be at the heart of this. In terms of healthy seas, we need healthy fish stocks, and that engagement is going to be key to building sustainable fisheries management. Fishing is an important part of the economy and the ecosystem, and it's important to many coastal communities around Scotland, including those located around the Clyde, and that's why we have to support sustainable fisheries in Scottish waters. We've got economic and social benefits and also supporting local services. There are all these benefits that Jamie McGregor and others referred to when they were speaking. They're very, very important and are more remote and fragile parts of this country. But we need to ensure that fishing in particular is sustainable. We need to ensure there is access to fishing grounds, and we also need to consider how best to share the marine environment with other users. So in particular, I want to build on the inshore fisheries strategy and look forward to working with fishermen and other stakeholders, including those in the Clyde, to ensure we have a sustainable and profitable inshore sector. And this is a pivotal year for inshore fisheries. And at the upcoming Inshore Fisheries Conference in Perth on the 28th of March, I will reflect on the progress we have made over the past 12 months since the last conference, and I will set out my priorities for the coming year. The Clyde will be an important element of our discussions at that event. And again, I hope members from all parties and those local communities recognise that inshore fisheries is also rising up the government's agenda. I believe there is also a consensus on the value of a healthy Clyde ecosystem, and we are lucky in having that breadth of expertise available. Clyde 2020 focuses on the ecosystem, including commercial and recreational fisheries, which again members have referred to, but it will also include the socio-economic interests that depend and derive benefit from the Clyde. We do need to work together and identify what further action is required to support regeneration of the Clyde ecosystem. I very much recognise that. And we need to recognise that action is already ongoing and work smartly to better coordinate and build on existing efforts. So this is what the new Clyde 2020 programme sets out to achieve. Marine Scotland, in partnership with the Firth of Clyde Forum, are holding a stakeholder summit on Clyde 2020 in Glasgow on the 23rd of April to develop a vision for the Clyde and, as I said before, the key steps to achieving that vision. So we'll all get together on the 23rd of April. We'll discuss many of the issues that have been raised in the Chamber tonight, thanks to Kenneth Gibson's motion, and we'll work out how to take them forward and plot a course to achieving good environmental status by 2020. There are many, many people that have an interest in the future of the Clyde, many on the gallery, as well as the MSPs in the Chamber. It won't be easy. There will be many tough subjects to discuss, but hopefully we can reach a consensus on many of those subjects and move forward. But more than ever before, the future of the Clyde is much higher up the Parliament's agenda, the Government's agenda, and of course it's all about the local communities' agendas as well, because we want to support our local communities, give them a say in the future of the Clyde, and I'm confident that through the Clyde 2020 process we will achieve that. And I commend Kenneth Gibson's motion to Parliament, which is playing a key role in keeping this issue on all our agendas as we take forward a healthy ecosystem in the Clyde. Thank you.
Many thanks, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes Kenneth Gibson's debate on Clyde 2020, and I now close this meeting of Parliament.